In the early 20th century, the world of music changed forever. After centuries of being rigidly set in its ways, it finally reached a liberating and ruleless adolescence when Dixieland jazz began to become popular. The birth of jazz was a monumental moment for music because it was the first of many new genres that would become popular during the preceding 90 years. Today, so many music genres have exploded, and even jazz itself has many different subgenres within it. So at this point you might be asking yourself, what on earth does this have to do with video games? Well, I'm telling you this because I believe during this console generation, video games as an art form have essentially gone through their own miniature adolescence, just like music did. Because one of the reasons this console generation has been so good is because it's brought so many different genres of video games into the spotlight. Another reason this console generation has been so good is because, we've had the light bar on the DualShock 4. That's been great, hasn't it? That's been a really utilized feature of the controller there. One particular game genre evolution that I have absolutely loved watching has been one that, surprisingly to me, has also been met with a lot of disdain and a lot of disrespect. You'll know them as walking simulators, because that's been the title that's been pinned to them like some sort of video game mark of Cain. But what I know them as is a very special group of beautiful, impacting, and brilliant video games. Sadly, as more and more of these have been released, they've been met with a huge polarization in the gaming world. For some, these games are amazing works of art that highlight how diverse and special video games can be. For others, these games aren't even video games because they're completely void of gameplay and they aren't fun. What's even more tragic than this polarization is the fact that the derogatory term that people have used to classify these games has stuck. So much so that the term walking simulator is now the name of the genre. I mean, look at this. This is actually a genre section on Steam. I mean, even critics who like these games are willing to call them walking simulators, even though the term walking simulator was actually a derogatory term in the first place. How have we allowed this to happen? I blame you, David Benioff and Dan Weiss. For a while, I've thought that we need to think of a new genre name for these games, but the truth is, I can't really think of a good one, and to be honest, walking simulators is pretty much just stuck to the wall now. But instead, I figure what I can do is talk to you about why these video games are so valuable. So if you're someone who doesn't like walking simulators, or you know of someone who has that attitude, please pass this video on to them, because this one goes out to you. I don't know. First off, the main argument for why these games are called walking simulators is because they're seemingly void of all gameplay. All they offer the player is the act of pushing forward on the analog stick to move a story forward. But in all honesty, I think this is people just missing the point. These games are not totally void of gameplay because, the player is controlling someone or something in the game. And that's like the sole criteria in what a video game is. Besides that, however, I think what people are missing is the fact that gameplay in these games is woven into their storytelling methods. Put simply, the storytelling mechanics in these games are also the gameplay mechanics. Regardless, anyone who thinks that the interactivity of these games doesn't add anything to the experience needs to play What Remains of Edith Finch. It's one of this month's free games on PS Plus, so you got no excuse not to give it a try. This game is amazing at using storytelling mechanics that are actually gameplay mechanics. For example, one of my favourite chapters of the game is the cannery section. You're being told a story about a man who works a monotonous job at a fish canning factory. And with your right thumb on the right analog stick, you control him putting fish into a guillotine, then tossing them onto a conveyor belt. While that's happening, you also hear about how the character fantasizes all day long about being this cool conqueror. So with your left thumb on the left stick, you control his fantasy. The game teaches you to do two things simultaneously, which is something that most AAA action-adventure games that are solely based on gameplay can't even do. But not only that, the gameplay makes the player's experience completely mirror the in-game character's duality of mind in the story. The monotony of working in a fish factory is totally captured when the simple analog stick movement for the right hand becomes completely autonomous. That is absolutely genius. And quite frankly, one of my favourite sections of any video game from this generation. Firewatch is another game that's come under fire for not having any gameplay. In this game, you play as a man named Henry. As you explore a national park, you can control a walkie-talkie that allows you to communicate with the game's only other character, Delilah, by choosing dialogue options. Alright, I'll level with you. It's pretty simple gameplay. There's honestly not a lot to it. However, I was thinking about it, and I don't think there is another central video game mechanic that manages to successfully move an entire game forward like Firewatch's walkie-talkie does. Think about it. One interactive and satisfying gameplay mechanic advances the story, the characters, their relationship, the exploration, the world building, the game's realism, and even the main character's appearance. I mean, I can't think of another single video game mechanic that does all of that. Can you? No, but you're right. These games are totally void of intuitive or satisfying gameplay. Okay, so the next reason I think these games have serious value is because they're extremely approachable. A lot, and I mean a lot, has been said this year about video game accessibility. And I know, the chances are if you hate walking simulators, you also play Dark Souls a lot and don't think any video games should be easy or void of challenge, because you're basically just a big sadist. I've heard it said a lot that gamers don't like walking simulators because there's no fail state. There's no dying, there's no stakes, and thus no compelling challenge to keep a player interested. And I think this in general is just a little bit ignorant of what makes walking simulators so compelling in the first place. First off, you're right, because you can't fail in a lot of these games. So there isn't a lot of what I'll call challenge engagement. But that doesn't mean that there isn't engagement of any sort. There is, and I think it comes in the form of a moral engagement. Let me explain. So there might not be consequence in Firewatch for dying like there is in Dark Souls, but there is emotional consequence for doing something like saying the wrong thing to Delilah. Your relationship with the only other character in the game hinges on your interaction with her, which happens solely through your dialogue choices. You learn pretty early on that if you say the wrong thing, Delilah will get mad at you. She will react to what you say, and your relationship throughout the game will definitely be changed as a result. I don't know about anyone else who played Firewatch, but for me, my potential failures with Delilah felt way more meaningful than if I died in Dark Souls. And lastly, I want to just address the hypocrisy of the argument that walking simulators don't have any value. Many critics have complained that a lot of video games just rely on violence and killing, yet they also shun walking simulators because they don't have gameplay. I mean, what other example do you need of a genre of video games that doesn't have any sort of violence whatsoever? Also, on a similar note, the people who always say that video games don't tell good stories are the same people that say they don't like walking simulators. Can we just consider this for a second? People are saying that video games are incapable of telling good stories, yet they outright ignore the genre of video games that uses the most interesting narrative tools. The ones that are solely concerned with telling a story first and foremost. The ones that academics are calling literary video games. I mean, try not to be so narrow-minded, and you might realize video games can tell amazing stories in ways that other art forms can't even begin to fathom. Video games have evolved. And the art form is growing into so many amazing things. Holding on to what video games used to be and saying that that is the only way they can be is kind of like being a conservative, actually. I mean, should we just start calling people video game Tories? Is that a thing we can do? But no, it's the equivalent of older generations of people saying that classical music is the only good type of music and that jazz and rock and dance music are all awful. Appreciate other types of music. Appreciate other people's opinions. And celebrate that video games as a whole are great. That's the moral of the story. Louis Armstrong, he was pretty cool. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you disagree with me. I really appreciate you, and I'd love to hear from you. Comment down below and continue the conversation. Tell me why you don't like walking simulators and make me look like a fool on the internet. I dare you. But don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit that bell icon, and share this video with a friend who doesn't like walking simulators, because it really helps. While I've got you here, did you know that Gamecoping isn't just a YouTube channel? We have a monthly podcast called Podcoping where we discuss this sort of stuff all the time. We also interview people. It's amazing, and it's now on Spotify, so it's very easy for you to get a hold of. Check it out. We also have a Medium publication where we post written work, including a new weekly post that summarizes the biggest video game news into one easy-to-read article. So give it a look. Thank you so much again for watching, and tune in next time.